The gunshots echoed through the twilight as Florence Vallens ran across the dusty plain, her heart pounding harder than the hooves of the horses pursuing her. Blood from a bullet graze stained her torn dress sleeve, the fabric once pristine and befitting her station now soiled by the desperate flight across the Nevada territory. Florence glanced over her shoulder, her honey blonde hair whipping wildly around her face. 3 riders appeared on the horizon, silhouettes growing larger against the setting sun. They were gaining on her. Her lungs burned with each gasping breath as she pushed herself toward the only shelter in sight, a ramshackle barn standing alone in the vast emptiness of the high desert. "There she is," a gruff voice called out, carrying across the open land. "Don't let her get away," Florence stumbled, her city boots unsuited for the rocky terrain. She had never imagined when she'd boarded the stagecoach in Boston that she would end up running for her life across the Nevada wilderness, pursued by men who wanted her dead for witnessing what she had seen. The barn loomed closer. If she could just reach it, perhaps she could hide until they passed. Her legs felt like lead, but fear propelled her forward. The sound of approaching horses grew louder. She could almost feel their breath on her neck. With a final desperate surge of strength, Florence reached the weathered doors of the barn and threw herself inside. The interior was dimly lit by thin rays of sunlight filtering through cracks in the wooden slats. The smell of hay and animals filled her nostrils as she frantically searched for a place to hide. "She went in there," one of the men shouted. "Circle round back." Florence's gaze darted around the barn. Stalls lined one wall and farming implements hung from pegs on another. A ladder led to a hayloft above. With no time to think, she scrambled toward a pile of hay in the corner, intending to bury herself within it. Before she could reach it, the barn door creaked open. Florence froze, trapped in the open with nowhere to run. A tall figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, hat pulled low over his eyes. For a moment, Florence thought one of her pursuers had found her, but then she realized this man was different, broader in the shoulders, with a quiet confidence in his stance that the others lacked. The stranger's gaze locked with hers for just a moment before the sound of approaching riders caused him to glance back. In 3 long strides, he crossed to where Florence stood rooted in fear. Without a word, he pulled her down behind a stack of hay bales, covering her body with his own as the barn doors burst open fully. "Who's in here?" called a harsh voice. "We know she came this way." Florence trembled beneath the stranger's weight, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her back. His breath was warm against her ear as he whispered, not a sound. He smelled of leather, tobacco, and the open range, nothing like the cologne-drenched gentleman of Boston society. One of his hands rested near her head, and she noticed the calluses that spoke of hard work and a life lived outdoors. "Checking the barn, Jenkins," the stranger called out in a lazy drawl, his voice completely transformed from the whisper he had used with her. He shifted slightly, keeping her hidden but raising himself up just enough to be seen. "Something spook you boys. You're riding like the devil himself is on your tail." Florence held her breath, pressing herself into the dirt floor of the barn, praying the stranger wouldn't betray her presence. "Looking for a woman," one of the riders said. "Blonde, blue dress. Seen anybody like that? Can't say that I have," the stranger replied easily. "Been in here most of the afternoon mending tack, haven't seen a soul pass by." There was a pause, filled only with the nervous shuffling of horses and Florence's thundering heartbeat, which she was certain must be audible to everyone present. "Mind if we take a look around?" Another voice, deeper than the first. "Suit yourself," the stranger said. "Though I'd appreciate if you'd make it quick. Daylight's wasting, and I've got work to finish before dark." Florence felt the stranger's body tense as boots hit the ground outside. The creak of saddle leather indicated at least one of the men had dismounted. She squeezed her eyes shut, feeling tears threatening to spill over. If they found her here, they would kill her, and probably this kind stranger too. Footsteps approached, circling around the perimeter of the barn. The stranger above her shifted slightly, angling his body to better shield her from view. "What's your business out here anyway?" the stranger asked conversationally, as though he weren't hiding a fugitive beneath him. "Mighty far from town. Our business is our own," came the curt reply. Just keep an eye out for that woman. She's dangerous. The stranger chuckled, a sound Florence felt rumble through his chest. A dangerous woman, eh? What'd she do break your heart? She's a thief and a murderer, the man snapped. Killed a man in cold blood back in Silver Creek. Florence wanted to cry out in protest. It was a lie, all of it was lies. But the stranger's hand found hers in the darkness between them, giving it a gentle squeeze that somehow conveyed reassurance. Well, I'll certainly keep watch, the stranger promised. Though I can't imagine a lady murderer choosing to hide out in my humble barn. More shuffling of feet, the sound drawing closer to their hiding place. Florence held her breath. Jenkins, called a voice from outside. Tracks leading west toward the ridge, fresh ones. The footsteps paused, then retreated. We're wasting time. She's probably halfway to the hills by now. Appreciate your help, the man called Jenkins said to the stranger, his voice laced with lingering suspicion. But if you do see her, don't approach. Send word to Sheriff Dawson in Silver Creek. There's a reward. I'll keep that in mind, the stranger replied easily. The sound of boots crunching on dirt faded, followed by the thud of hooves as the riders departed. Still, the stranger didn't move, remaining perfectly still as the sounds grew distant. After what seemed like an eternity, he carefully lifted himself away from Florence, moving to the barn entrance to peer out. They're gone, he said softly, turning back to face her. For now, at least. Florence pushed herself up on shaky arms, hay clinging to her torn dress and disheveled hair. In the dim light of the barn, she could now see her savior clearly. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes were a clear gray blue beneath the brim of his hat, and several days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw. He wasn't handsome in the polished way of Eastern gentlemen, but there was something compelling about the quiet strength in his features. Thank you, Florence whispered, her voice hoarse from fear and exertion. They would have killed me. The stranger nodded, studying her with careful eyes. Are you what they said you are? A murderer? Florence straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly despite the fear still coursing through her. No, I'm a witness. That's why they want me dead. The man considered this, then gave a single nod, as though he'd already decided to believe her before she'd even answered. Name's Adam Donovan, he said, extending a hand to help her up. Florence Vallens, she replied, placing her trembling hand in his much larger one. Well, Miss Vallens, Adam said, his voice carrying a hint of wry amusement, seems like you've gotten yourself into a heap of trouble. Florence couldn't help the small, hysterical laugh that escaped her. That, Mr. Donovan, is a magnificent understatement. Adam's lips quirked into a slight smile. Those men will be back once they realize they've lost your trail. We'd best not be here when they return. Florence asked, unable to hide her surprise. Adam Donovan's expression grew serious, his eyes taking in the blood on her sleeve and the exhaustion etched on her face. I don't make a habit of saving women from murderers only to abandon them afterward. Besides, he added, a shadow passing over his features, I've got no love for Jenkins and his crew. They work for Harlan Wade. The name meant nothing to Florence, but the way Adam said it told her everything she needed to know. I have nowhere to go, she admitted, hating how vulnerable the words made her feel. I was traveling to visit my aunt in Sacramento when everything happened. Adam considered this information, then seemed to come to a decision. I've got a small place about 3 miles from here. It's not much, but it's defensible, and those men won't think to look there right away. Can you ride? Florence hesitated. She'd ridden in Boston's parks on gentle mares with side saddles and grooms in attendance. She suspected that wasn't what Adam Donovan meant. I'll learn quickly, she said with more confidence than she felt. This earned her another hint of a smile from the taciturn cowboy. I expect you will, Miss Vallens. I expect you will. Adam moved to the back of the barn where a handsome chestnut gelding was tied. He worked quickly, checking the cinch on the saddle before leading the horse to where Florence stood. What about your work here? She asked, glancing around the barn. Not my barn, Adam explained. I was just passing through, spotted a loose board that needed fixing. Force of habit to repair things. He helped her mount, his hands strong and steady on her waist as he lifted her to the saddle. Florence arranged her torn skirts as best she could, grateful that at least she wasn't wearing the massive hoops fashionable in Boston drawing rooms. Adam swung up behind her, his chest a solid presence against her back. One arm reached around her to take the reins, effectively caging her within the circle of his embrace. "Hold tight," he advised, his breath warm against her ear. "And stay low. We'll stick to the ravines where we can. Less chance of being spotted that way." As they rode out into the gathering darkness, Florence Vallens found herself placing her life in the hands of a stranger, a rough-hewn cowboy who had shielded her with his body, and it seemed, was now prepared to shield her with something more: his word. The setting sun painted the Nevada sky in shades of fire as they rode away from the barn, leaving behind the only trail her pursuers had. Florence wondered what kind of man would risk himself for a stranger, and what might happen now that their fates were intertwined. But as the rhythm of the horse's gait lulled her aching body, she knew that whatever lay ahead, she was no longer facing it alone. The journey to Adam's homestead seemed to stretch endlessly through the darkness. Florence, unused to riding astride and sharing a saddle, found muscles aching that she hadn't known existed. Still, she kept quiet, determined not to show weakness. Adam guided his horse expertly through ravines and dry creek beds, clearly familiar with every fold in the land. After riding in silence for nearly an hour, he spoke, his voice low near her ear. "We're close now, just over that ridge." Florence peered ahead but could make out little in the moonlight. "How do you know where you're going in this darkness?" "Been riding these lands since I was a boy," Adam replied simply. "I know them by feel as much as by sight." They crested a small rise, and suddenly a small cabin came into view, nestled against a rocky outcropping that shielded it from the north wind. It was a simple structure, built of rough-hewn logs with a small corral attached to one side. "It's not much," Adam said as he reined the horse to a stop. "But it's solid, built it myself." "It looks wonderful," Florence replied honestly, thinking of the brutal night she would have spent in the open had he not found her. Adam dismounted first, then reached up to help Florence down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, but Adam's steady hands kept her upright until she found her balance. "Let's get inside," he said, glancing around at the dark landscape. "I'll tend to Thunder after." The interior of the cabin was spare but neat. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a small table and 2 chairs positioned nearby. A bed sat in one corner, covered with a patchwork quilt. Shelves lined another wall, holding books, which surprised Florence. A trunk sat at the foot of the bed, and various tools and necessities hung from pegs on the walls. Adam quickly lit a lamp, bathing the single room in a warm glow. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing to one of the chairs. "Let me look at that arm." Florence had almost forgotten about the bullet graze in all the subsequent chaos. She sank gratefully into the chair while Adam moved around the small space, gathering supplies. He returned with a basin of water, clean cloth, and a small bottle. "This will sting," he warned as he gently pushed up her torn sleeve. Florence bit her lip as he cleaned the wound, his touch surprisingly gentle for such large, work-roughened hands. "It's just a graze," he told her after examining it closely. "Won't need stitching. You're lucky." "Lucky?" Florence repeated with a hollow laugh. "I don't feel particularly lucky, Mr. Donovan." Adam's eyes met hers, serious but not unkind. "You're alive. That's more than some can say after crossing paths with Jenkins and his ilk." He applied a salve to the wound, then bandaged it neatly. "Are you hungry?" he asked, standing to put away the medical supplies. Florence suddenly realized she hadn't eaten since morning. "Starving, actually." Adam nodded and moved to the fireplace, where he built a small fire and set a pot to heat. While he worked, Florence took the opportunity to study him more carefully. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of a life lived with purpose. Nothing wasted, nothing for show. "How long have you lived out here alone?" she asked, watching as he added ingredients to the pot. 5 years, he replied without looking up. "After the war, I wanted quiet." "The war," Florence repeated. "You fought for the Union," Adam nodded. "Massachusetts 20th Infantry saw action at Gettysburg, among other places." Florence was surprised. "You're from Massachusetts." "I would never have guessed." A ghost of a smile passed across his face. Born there, left at 17, the West gets in your blood. What brought you out here initially? Florence asked, genuinely curious about this man who had so unexpectedly become her protector. Adam was silent for a moment, stirring the contents of the pot. A need to see something bigger than Boston streets, he finally said. My father was a cobbler, expected me to take over his shop. I had other ideas. The simple stew he prepared was hearty and filling. Florence ate gratefully, realizing how famished she truly was. As they ate, Adam asked her, Now, Miss Vallens, I think it's time you told me what kind of trouble you're in and why those men want you dead. Florence set down her spoon, gathering her thoughts. I was traveling to Sacramento by stagecoach. We stopped in a small town called Silver Creek for the night. I was staying at the hotel when I heard a commotion in the room next to mine. I looked through the adjoining door keyhole. She flushed, embarrassed by her admission of eavesdropping. I saw 3 men. One of them was Jenkins arguing with another man, something about mining rights and forged documents. Adam's expression grew grim. Go on. The argument escalated. One of them drew a gun and shot the other man. I must have made a noise because suddenly they were all looking at the door. I ran, grabbed my reticule and ran from the hotel. They came after me. Florence shuddered at the memory. I managed to hide in a livery stable until morning, then slipped out with a group of travelers leaving town. But they caught up to me when the stagecoach stopped to change horses. I've been running ever since. Adam was quiet for a long moment. The man they shot, did he die? Florence nodded, tears filling her eyes. I believe so. It was terrible. And you could identify them all. Yes. I saw their faces clearly. They weren't even wearing masks. Adam sighed heavily. That explains why they're so determined to find you. You're the only witness to their crime. Who is Harlan Wade? Florence asked, remembering the name Adam had mentioned earlier. A darkness passed over Adam's face. A man who thinks he owns this part of Nevada. He's been buying up land, water rights, mines, anything he can get his hands on. Those who don't sell willingly often find themselves persuaded by men like Jenkins. You've had dealings with him. Florence asked cautiously, sensing a personal history. You could say that. Adam's tone made it clear the subject was closed, at least for now. A heavy silence fell between them. Florence felt the weight of her situation pressing down upon her. What am I to do now, Mr. Donovan? I can't keep running forever. Adam considered her question carefully. First, you need rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure out our next steps. Silver Creek has a telegraph office. We could send word to the territorial marshal. And in the meantime, Florence asked. In the meantime, Adam said firmly, you stay here where it's safe. I give you my word, Miss Vallens, they'll have to go through me to get to you. The declaration hung in the air between them, a solemn oath from a man who, Florence suspected, did not make promises lightly. Thank you, she whispered, overwhelmed by his steadfast protection. Adam nodded once, then rose to clear their bowls. You take the bed, he said. I'll sleep by the fire. Florence started to protest, but the exhaustion of the day caught up with her all at once. The thought of a real bed, even a simple one, was too tempting to refuse. Adam lent her one of his clean shirts to sleep in and turned his back discreetly while she changed behind a screen he set up for privacy. The shirt hung to her knees, smelling of soap and open air. As she settled into the narrow bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin, Florence watched Adam arrange a bedroll near the hearth. Mr. Donovan, she called softly. He turned, his face half in shadow. Adam, he corrected gently. Out here, formality seems a waste of breath. Florence smiled tiredly. Adam, then, I just wanted to say, I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been in that barn today. Best not to dwell on what didn't come to pass, he replied. Get some sleep, Florence. Tomorrow will come soon enough. As she drifted toward sleep, Florence realized it was the first time he had used her given name. Somehow, in this strange land so far from everything familiar, it sounded right on his lips. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was the solid presence of Adam Donovan across the room, a sentinel between her and the dangers that lurked in the wilderness beyond. Florence woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet movement. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was back in her aunt's house in Boston, with the maid bringing in her morning tray. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up with a gasp. "Easy," Adam said from where he stood by the stove. "You're safe." Morning light filtered through the cabin's small windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. Adam had already been up for some time, judging by the coffee brewing and the fresh wood in the fire. "What time is it?" Florence asked, pushing her tangled hair away from her face. "Just past 7, Adam replied, pouring coffee into a tin mug. "You needed the rest." Florence accepted the coffee gratefully, cupping the warm mug between her hands. "What's the plan for today?" she asked, trying to sound braver than she felt. Adam leaned against the rough-hewn table, his own coffee in hand. "I need to ride into town for supplies. We'll need food if you're staying here, and I want to see if I can get word to the marshal about what happened." Florence felt a flicker of panic at the thought of being left alone. "Is it safe for you to go to town? Won't Jenkins and his men be looking for both of us now? Petaluma is about 20 miles southwest of here," Adam explained. "Different direction from Silver Creek. Jenkins and his boys don't usually operate that far from Wade's territory, but I'll keep my eyes open." "Petaluma," Florence repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "Is it a large town, bigger than some, smaller than most?" Adam replied with a slight smile. "Has what we need: general store, telegraph office, saloon, grew up around the ranching trade." "I'm coming with you," Florence declared suddenly, setting down her mug with determination. Adam raised an eyebrow. "That's not wise, you'd be safer here. Alone in the middle of nowhere." Florence countered. "What if they track you here while you're gone? Besides," she added, seeing him about to object further, "I need certain items, female necessities." A faint flush colored Adam's tanned cheeks, but he nodded in understanding. "Fair point, but we'll need to disguise you somehow. That blue dress is too recognizable, and your manner of speaking marks you as Eastern." Florence looked down at her torn, dirty dress. "I don't have anything else." Adam was quiet for a moment, then moved to the trunk at the foot of his bed. He opened it and rummaged through the contents before pulling out a bundle of cloth. "These belong to my sister," he said, holding out what appeared to be a simple dress and shawl. "She stayed with me for a spell about 2 years back, left these when she moved on." Florence took the offered clothing, surprised. "You have a sister. You didn't mention family." A shadow passed over Adam's face. "Sarah's out in California now, married a man who struck it rich in the gold fields." He paused, then added, "We don't correspond much these days." Florence sensed there was more to the story, but Adam's tone made it clear he wasn't inclined to elaborate. Instead, she examined the dress. It was simple but well made, a faded brown calico that would blend in with the local women's attire. "Thank you," she said. "I'll take good care of it." Adam nodded. "We'll leave in half an hour. The sooner we get to town and back, the better." While Adam went outside to prepare the horse, Florence washed as best she could using the basin of water he'd left for her. The dress fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in the waist and tight across the bust. She used her own petticoat underneath, grateful for the familiar feel of the cotton against her skin. When she stepped outside, Adam was already saddling Thunder. He glanced up as she approached, and for a moment, his eyes widened slightly before he quickly looked away. "The dress suits you," he said gruffly, adjusting the saddle cinch with perhaps more attention than was strictly necessary. Florence felt an unexpected flush of pleasure at the compliment. "Thank you. Will I pass for a local?" Adam gave her an appraising look. "Pull your hair back tighter like the ranch women do, and try not to talk too much. Your accent will give you away." Florence nodded, quickly repinning her hair into a severe bun at the nape of her neck. "How do we explain my presence if anyone asks?" Adam seemed to consider this question carefully. "Cousin from Denver, come to visit after being widowed," he finally decided. "Keeps things simple, explains why you're new to the area." "A widow," Florence repeated, instinctively touching her bare ring finger. "People ask fewer questions of widows," Adam explained. "Show respect for their grief by not prying." "Clever," Florence acknowledged. "What's my name to be then? Florence might be too distinctive." "Flora," Adam suggested. "Close enough that you'll respond naturally, common enough not to raise eyebrows." "Flora Donovan, widow from Denver," Florence rehearsed quietly. "I can remember that." Adam helped her mount Thunder, then swung up behind her as he had the day before. As they set off toward Petaluma, Florence found herself acutely aware of his solid presence at her back, his arm occasionally brushing against hers as he handled the reins. The journey to town took nearly 3 hours, during which Florence marveled at the harsh beauty of the landscape. Unlike the lush greenery of Massachusetts, the Nevada territory possessed a stark, unforgiving allure, all vast skies and rugged mountains, with scrubby vegetation clinging tenaciously to the rocky soil. "It's beautiful in its way," she commented as they crested a rise that afforded a sweeping view of the valley below. "Most folks don't see it," Adam replied, surprising her. "They just see what isn't here: trees, water, easy living." "And what do you see?" Florence asked, turning slightly to glance at his profile. Adam's eyes scanned the horizon, a softness entering his usually guarded expression. "Freedom, space to breathe, land that doesn't lie to you, it tells you exactly what it is, harsh and fair all at once." Florence studied him with new interest. There was a poetry to his words that belied his rough exterior. As they approached Petaluma, Florence could see it was indeed a modest town, a single main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above the rest, and scattered residences spreading outward like ripples in a pond. "Remember," Adam murmured as they reached the outskirts, "you're Flora Donovan, my widowed cousin. Speak as little as possible." Florence nodded, straightening her shoulders and composing her face into what she hoped was an appropriate expression of quiet dignity. Adam tied Thunder to the hitching post outside the general store. As he helped Florence down, he kept his voice low. "Stay close to me. If anything seems wrong, we leave immediately." The general store was dimly lit and crowded with merchandise, bolts of fabric stacked alongside sacks of flour, tools hanging from the ceiling, and glass jars of candy and tobacco on the counter. A bell jingled as they entered, and an older man with spectacles looked up from where he was tallying figures in a ledger. "Adam Donovan," the man greeted with a friendly nod. "Been a while since you've graced us with your presence." "Mr. Peterson," Adam returned the greeting with a touch to his hat brim. "Been busy at the homestead." The storekeeper's curious gaze shifted to Florence. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "My cousin Flora," Adam replied smoothly. "From Denver. She's staying with me for a spell." Florence gave a demure nod, keeping her eyes appropriately downcast as she'd seen grieving widows do. "My condolences, madam," Mr. Peterson said, apparently noting her plain dress and somber demeanor. "Petaluma's a fine place to recover your spirits." "Thank you, sir," Florence replied softly, carefully modulating her voice to minimize her Boston accent. Adam handed her a small basket. "Why don't you gather what you need while I speak with Mr. Peterson about feed prices?" Understanding his intention to give her privacy for her personal purchases, Florence moved toward the section of the store that displayed women's necessities. As she selected items, she kept her ears tuned to the conversation between Adam and the storekeeper. "Heard there was trouble over Silver Creek Way," Mr. Peterson was saying in a lower voice. "Shooting at the hotel, they say." Florence's hand froze over a packet of hairpins. "That's so," Adam replied, his tone carefully neutral. "When was this?" "2 days back." "Word is a woman witnessed it. Eastern lady traveling to Sacramento. She disappeared after. Some say she did the shooting herself. Others think she was taken." Florence carefully resumed her shopping, moving slowly along the shelves while straining to hear more, any lawman looking into it. Adam asked. "Sheriff in Silver Creek sent telegrams all around," Mr. Peterson replied. "Though between you and me, that sheriff's deep in Harlan Wade's pocket. Whatever the truth is, I reckon it'll be Wade's version that sticks." Adam made a noncommittal sound. "Speaking of telegrams, I need to send one. Office still next to the bank, same as always," the storekeeper confirmed. Florence completed her shopping and rejoined Adam at the counter. Mr. Peterson tallied their purchases while making cheerful small talk that Florence answered with polite smiles and minimal words. As they exited the store, packages in hand, Adam leaned close to murmur, "I need to send that telegram. The saloon's across the street. Wait for me there. You'll attract less attention inside than standing alone on the boardwalk." Florence hesitated. "A saloon, is that appropriate?" A hint of amusement flickered in Adam's eyes. They serve food as well as liquor. At this hour, it's respectable enough for a widow having a quiet meal. Just sit in the corner and keep to yourself. With some trepidation, Florence crossed the dusty street to the establishment called the Silver Spur. Pushing through the batwing doors, she was relieved to find the interior relatively quiet, with only a few patrons scattered at tables eating midday meals. She chose a small table in the corner and ordered coffee from a tired-looking woman who barely gave her a second glance. From her vantage point, Florence could see the telegraph office across the street, where Adam had disappeared inside. The coffee was strong and bitter, but Florence sipped it gratefully, using the cup to partially shield her face. The normalcy of the scene, people eating, a piano standing silent in the corner, sunlight streaming through the windows, seemed surreal after the terror of the previous day. Her moment of relative peace was shattered when the batwing doors swung open and 3 men entered. Florence's blood ran cold as she recognized one of them, not Jenkins, but another of the men who had been in that hotel room in Silver Creek. The one who had actually pulled the trigger. Florence ducked her head, turning slightly toward the wall. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone in the room must hear it. Where was Adam? She needed to warn him. "Whiskey," the man ordered, his voice carrying across the quiet saloon, "and information if you're selling it." The bartender set a glass in front of him. Information about what? Woman traveling through, blonde, fine clothes, might have passed through yesterday or today. Florence kept her head down, praying her severely pinned hair and plain dress would be disguise enough. She risked a glance toward the door, desperate to see Adam returning. "Haven't seen anyone fitting that description," the bartender replied. "Not many fine ladies pass through Petaluma these days." The killer leaned forward, lowering his voice, but Florence could still make out his words. "There's good money for anyone who spots her. She's wanted for murder." A murmur went through the few patrons in the saloon. Florence felt sick with fear. How long before someone noticed the stranger in their midst and started asking questions? Just when she thought she couldn't bear the tension another moment, the doors swung open again and Adam stepped inside. His eyes found her immediately, then shifted to the men at the bar. His expression didn't change, but Florence saw his hand move subtly closer to the pistol at his hip. He walked casually to her table, his back to the men. "Ready to go, cousin?" he asked, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by those nearby. Florence nodded, rising on shaky legs. Adam offered his arm, positioning himself between her and the men at the bar as they walked toward the door. They had almost reached it when a voice called out, "Hold up there, stranger." Adam paused, turning slowly. "You addressing me?" The killer was studying them with narrowed eyes. "Don't believe I've seen you folks around before. Just passing through," Adam replied evenly. "Bringing my cousin home from Denver." The man's eyes shifted to Florence, who kept her gaze fixed on the floor. "Your cousin, huh? What brings a lady all the way out here?" Before Adam could answer, the saloon keeper intervened. "Leave them be, Wilson. Ladies in mourning, plain as day. Show some respect." Wilson's suspicious gaze lingered a moment longer, but he finally nodded and turned back to his drink. Adam guided Florence outside, maintaining their unhurried pace until they reached Thunder. Only then did he whisper, "We need to leave. Now." They mounted quickly, Adam securing their packages before guiding the horse down the main street at a deliberate walk. Florence could feel tension radiating from him, but he maintained the appearance of a man simply going about his business. "That was one of them," Florence whispered, her hands trembling where they gripped the saddle horn. "The one who fired the gun." "I know," Adam replied grimly. "They're casting a wider net than I expected." Once they cleared the town limits, Adam urged Thunder into a ground-eating lope. Instead of returning the way they had come, he veered eastward, following a narrow trail that wound through rocky terrain. "Where are we going?" Florence asked, clinging to the saddle as the horse navigated the uneven path. "Taking a different route back," Adam explained. "In case they decide to follow." They rode in tense silence for nearly an hour before Adam finally slowed Thunder to a walk to let the horse catch his breath. Only then did Florence ask the question that had been burning in her mind. "Did you manage to send the telegram?" Adam nodded. To an old friend who served with me in the war. He's a deputy marshal now, based in Carson City. If anyone can help us, it's Frank's." "What did you tell him?" Florence asked. "The truth. That I'm harboring a witness to a murder committed by Harlan Wade's men and that the local law is compromised." Florence digested this information. "How long before he can help us?" "Depends on where he is," Adam admitted. "Could be days, days." Florence tried not to let her dismay show. Days of hiding, days of looking over their shoulders, days of putting Adam at risk for her sake. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I've brought nothing but trouble to your door." Adam was silent for so long that Florence thought he might not respond. Finally, he said, "Sometimes trouble finds you whether you're looking for it or not. The measure of a person is what they do when it comes." "And what would you have done?" Florence asked. "If you had witnessed what I did, the same as you," Adam replied without hesitation. "Run like hell, then seek justice." After a pause, he added, "Though I might have grabbed a weapon on my way out." Despite everything, Florence found herself smiling. "I'll remember that for next time I witness a murder." Adam's low chuckle rumbled through his chest against her back. "Let's hope there isn't a next time." They continued their journey home, taking a circuitous route that added hours to their travel time but reduced the chance of being followed. By the time they reached Adam's cabin, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. As Adam helped her down from Thunder, his hands lingering at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary, Florence realized with sudden clarity that for better or worse, her fate was now inextricably linked with that of this solitary cowboy who had pledged to protect her. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, as she watched him lead Thunder to the small corral, his movements confident and sure in the fading light, she felt something else entirely, a warmth that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the man who had shielded her with his body and sworn to keep her safe. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended state, moments of tense vigilance interspersed with periods of unexpected tranquility. Florence quickly established a routine within the confines of Adam's small cabin, finding ways to make herself useful while they waited for word from the marshal. She discovered that Adam, for all his self-sufficiency, had been living with only the barest essentials of comfort. The cabin was clean but sparse, functional rather than welcoming. With subtle touches rearranging the few pieces of furniture to create a more conversational setting, hanging the dish towels in a neat row instead of in a pile, placing wildflowers she gathered in a tin, and on the table she began transforming the space. Adam noticed, though he said little about the changes. But she caught him looking at the flowers one evening, a curious expression on his face as though they were artifacts from another world. "Does it bother you?" Florence asked, gesturing to the modest decorative touches she'd added. "Me changing things?" Adam shook his head slowly. "No, just been a while since this place felt lived in." They settled into a routine of shared meals and divided chores. Florence took over the cooking, discovering to her surprise that she enjoyed the challenge of creating meals from the simple ingredients available. Adam taught her to make biscuits in the Dutch oven, standing close behind her as he showed her how to regulate the heat by adding or removing coals from the lid. "You're a quick study," he commented, as she successfully turned out a batch of golden brown biscuits on her second attempt. Florence beamed with pride. "My mother would faint dead away if she could see me now. She always insisted cooking was for servants, not for Vallens women." "And what did Vallens women do?" Adam asked, sampling one of the hot biscuits with obvious appreciation. "Plan dinner parties. Embroider handkerchiefs, make advantageous marriages." Florence wrinkled her nose. "I was rather a disappointment on all fronts." Adam raised an eyebrow. "No advantageous marriage waiting for you back east," Florence laughed, though the sound held little humor. "There was one, actually. Henry Caldwell, cotton merchant and my father's business partner, 46 years old, twice widowed with 3 children and a fondness for brandy." "You didn't care for him?" Adam asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I found him repulsive," Florence admitted frankly. "When he tried to kiss me in my father's library, he smelled of cigars and cologne so strong it made my eyes water." A smile tugged at the corner of Adam's mouth. And what did you do? I pushed him into my father's prized orchid collection, Florence replied, unable to suppress a grin at the memory. The plants were ruined, and father was furious. That's when I was sent to visit my aunt in Sacramento to reflect on my behavior and develop a proper appreciation for my responsibilities. Adam laughed then, a real laugh that transformed his usually serious face. Sounds to me like Boston's loss is the West's gain. The moment hung between them, warm and unexpectedly intimate. Florence found herself studying the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his smile softened the hard planes of his face. Adam cleared his throat, breaking the spell. I should check on Thunder before it gets dark. Florence watched him go, a strange fluttering in her chest that had nothing to do with fear of their pursuers and everything to do with the man who had just left the room. On the fourth morning, Florence woke to find Adam already dressed and buckling on his gun belt. "What is it?" she asked, instantly alert. "Rider coming," he replied tersely. "Stay inside." Florence's heart leapt into her throat as she hurried to the window. In the distance, a single horseman approached at a steady pace. "Is it them?" she asked, dreading the answer. Adam studied the approaching figure. "No, different horse, different posture. Could be Frank's." Relief coursed through her, though she remained tense as Adam stepped outside to meet the visitor. She watched through the window as the rider dismounted a man about Adam's age with a deputy marshal's badge gleaming on his chest. The two men clasped hands warmly before engaging in conversation too distant for Florence to hear. After several minutes, Adam gestured toward the cabin, and both men started walking toward the door. Florence hastily smoothed her hair and straightened her borrowed dress, suddenly conscious of her appearance. "Florence," Adam called as he entered. "This is Deputy Marshal James Franks. Jim, this is Miss Florence Vallens." The marshal removed his hat, revealing thinning sandy hair and a friendly face weathered by sun and wind. "Madam, Adam here tells me you've had quite an ordeal." "That's one way to put it," Florence replied, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming, Marshal." "Jim's brought news," Adam said, his expression grave. "You'd better sit down." As they gathered around Adam's small table, Marshal Franks explained the situation. "The official story in Silver Creek is that you murdered a man named Robert Langley, a respected businessman, and stole valuable documents before fleeing." "That's preposterous," Florence exclaimed. "He was the one who was murdered by Jenkins and his men." Franks nodded. "I believe you. Langley was known to us. He was investigating land fraud in the territory, particularly suspicious transactions involving Harlan Wade's mining company." "So he was what, a government agent?" Adam asked. "Not officially," Franks replied. "He was a lawyer who had several clients who'd lost land to Wade under questionable circumstances. He was building a case." Florence leaned forward. "The documents they were arguing about, could those have been evidence against Wade?" "Most likely," Franks confirmed. "Which is why they needed to silence both Langley and any witnesses." He turned to Florence. "Did you see these documents?" She shook her head. "No, I only heard them arguing about papers and mining rights before." She swallowed hard. "Before they shot him." Franks sighed heavily. "Without those documents and with the sheriff in Wade's pocket, it's your word against theirs. And they've had time to create a very different story." "So what happens now?" Adam asked, his voice tight. "I've sent telegrams to my superiors and to the governor's office," Franks explained. But official wheels turned slowly. "In the meantime, Miss Vallens remains in danger. She can stay here," Adam said firmly. Franks gave his friend a measured look. "Adam, they're searching everywhere. Yesterday, 3 of Wade's men were asking questions in Petaluma. It's only a matter of time before someone remembers a man and his widowed cousin." Florence felt cold dread settling in her stomach. "What are you suggesting, Marshal?" "We need to get you somewhere safer," Franks replied. "Somewhere with more people and proper law enforcement." "Carson City, perhaps." "And how do we get there without being seen?" Adam challenged. "It's 100 miles through open country." Franks smiled grimly. "That's where my plan comes in. 2 days from now, the overland stage will be carrying a significant gold shipment from the Comstock mines to San Francisco. I'm one of the assigned guards. We can arrange for Miss Vallens to join that stage." A stage carrying gold will have extra security, Adam reasoned aloud, but it will also attract attention. Exactly, Franks confirmed. Wade's men would never expect her to travel on such a high-profile coach. They're looking for someone hiding, not someone hiding in plain sight. Florence considered the plan. And once I reach Carson City, we'll arrange protective custody until we can get your testimony before a judge, Franks explained. With a federal warrant for the murderers, local corruption becomes less relevant. A heavy silence fell over the room. Florence looked from Franks to Adam, whose jaw was set in a hard line. It's too risky, Adam finally said. Too many variables, too many things that could go wrong. Do we have a better option? Florence asked quietly. Adam met her eyes, and in that moment she could see his concern, his desire to protect her warring with the practical reality of their situation. I'll go with her, he declared suddenly. Franks raised his eyebrows. Adam, I'll buy passage on the same stage, Adam continued, cutting him off. As additional protection. And your place here? Franks asked. The homestead you've worked so hard to build. Adam glanced around the cabin, his gaze lingering on the wildflowers in their tin can. It'll keep. His eyes returned to Florence. Some things are more important. The simple declaration stole Florence's breath. That this man, who had already risked so much for her, would abandon his home to continue protecting her. The magnitude of it was almost overwhelming. I can't let you do that, she protested weakly. You've already done so much. Adam's expression was resolute. I gave my word to keep you safe. I intend to honor it. Marshal Franks looked between them, an understanding dawning in his eyes that Florence wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. Very well, he said after a moment. The stage stops at Thompson Station, about 15 miles from here. Be there by noon the day after tomorrow. I'll be riding shotgun. As the marshal prepared to leave, he took Adam aside for a private word. Florence busied herself with tidying the already neat cabin, her mind racing with the implications of their plan and of Adam's decision to accompany her. Once Franks had departed, Adam returned to find Florence standing in the middle of the room, arms wrapped around herself. You don't have to come with me, she said softly. Marshal Franks seems capable. Adam's eyes met hers, steady and certain. I know I don't have to, I want to. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Why risk everything for someone you barely know? Adam was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving hers. Because sometimes you meet someone, and you just know that your path and theirs were meant to cross. The simple honesty of his words touched something deep within Florence. There was no artifice in Adam Donovan, no hidden agenda. He said what he meant and meant what he said. Besides, he added with the ghost of a smile, I've grown rather accustomed to having flowers on my table. The tension broke, and Florence found herself laughing even as unexpected tears pricked her eyes. If flowers are all it takes to win your loyalty, Mr. Donovan, you're easily pleased. Not easily, he corrected gently. Just correctly. They spent the rest of the day preparing for their journey. Adam taught Florence how to handle his spare revolver, just in case, he insisted, and she proved to be a surprisingly good shot. My father believed all proper young ladies should know how to shoot, she explained when Adam expressed his surprise. He said it was like knowing how to swim, a skill one hopes never to need, but essential nonetheless. As evening fell, they sat side by side on Adam's small porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring packing and final preparations, and the day after would see them embarking on a dangerous journey with no certainty of what awaited at its end. Yet despite the peril ahead, Florence found a curious peace in this moment, sitting beside the man who had become her protector, her friend, and perhaps something more that neither of them had yet found the courage to name. Are you afraid? Adam asked quietly, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Florence considered the question honestly. Yes, she admitted, but not as much as I should be. She turned to look at him, finding his eyes already on her. Not with you beside me. Something shifted in Adam's expression, a softening, a moment of vulnerability that he quickly mastered. But his hand found hers in the growing darkness, rough fingers entwining with her smoother ones in a silent promise that spoke more eloquently than words. They sat that way until the first stars appeared, two people brought together by chance and danger, holding fast against whatever tomorrow might bring. The journey to Thompson's station took most of the morning. Florence rode behind Adam as they had before, but now the close proximity felt different, charged with an awareness that had been building between them over their days together. They arrived with time to spare, finding the station to be little more than a stagecoach stop with a small trading post attached. A few other travelers milled about, waiting for the westbound stage. "Remember," Adam murmured as they dismounted, "you're Flora Wilson, traveling to visit family in Carson City. I'm just another passenger you happened to meet at the station." Florence nodded, adjusting the plain bonnet she wore to shadow her face. "And if we're recognized?" Adam's hand brushed his gun. "We'll deal with that if it happens." The stage arrived precisely at noon in a cloud of dust, the team of 6 horses pulling to a stop before the station. Florence's heart leapt when she spotted Marshal Franks riding shotgun beside the driver. As the current passengers disembarked, Adam purchased their tickets while Florence stood slightly apart, playing the role of a stranger. When the call came to board, Adam gallantly offered his hand to help her up, just as he would for any lady. "Thank you, sir," she said formally, though she couldn't resist adding in a whisper, "Such a gentleman." Adam's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the closest he would come to a smile while maintaining their charade. The coach was crowded with 6 passengers plus the driver and Marshal Franks outside. Beside Florence sat an elderly woman traveling to visit her grandchildren, while across from them were a young married couple and a portly businessman who immediately closed his eyes and began to snore. Adam took the remaining seat nearest the door, positioning himself where he could easily see out both windows. As the stage lurched into motion, Florence caught Marshal Franks's eye through the window. He gave her a reassuring nod before turning his attention to the road ahead. The journey was uncomfortable, hot, dusty, and jarring as the coach bounced over the rutted road. Florence did her best to make small talk with the elderly woman, Mrs. Peterson, who fortunately seemed content to dominate the conversation with tales of her grandchildren. "And my Emily is expecting her third," the woman was saying when the stage suddenly slowed. "Oh, are we stopping already?" Adam tensed, his hand moving subtly toward his gun as he peered out the window. "Downed tree across the road," he reported, his voice casual but his eyes alert. Florence felt a chill despite the heat of the day. A common enough occurrence, but also a classic ambush technique. Outside, they could hear Marshal Franks and the driver conversing in low voices. The coach rocked slightly as Franks dismounted. "Ladies and gentlemen," the marshal called through the window, "we'll need a few minutes to clear the path. Please remain in the coach." Florence exchanged a glance with Adam, seeing her own suspicion mirrored in his eyes. This delay hadn't been part of the plan. Long minutes passed. The businessmen continued to snore while the young couple whispered nervously to each other. Mrs. Peterson had finally run out of grandchildren's stories and had begun fanning herself vigorously with a handkerchief. "Taking quite some time to move one tree," Adam remarked casually, though his body remained coiled with tension. Just as Florence was about to respond, gunfire erupted outside the coach. The elderly woman screamed as a bullet shattered the window, showering them with glass. "Everyone down." Adam shouted, already drawing his weapon. "Keep your heads low." Florence dropped to the floor of the coach, pulling Mrs. Peterson down with her. The businessman had awoken with a shout and now cowered on the floor, while the young husband tried to shield his wife with his body. More gunshots rang out. She could distinguish at least 3 different weapons. Outside, she heard Marshal Franks shouting orders, his voice nearly drowned out by the panicked whinnying of the coach horses. Adam had positioned himself at the broken window, returning fire at unseen assailants. "Florence," he called, abandoning pretense in the chaos, "check the other side. Tell me what you see." Florence crawled to the opposite window, staying low. Cautiously raising her head just enough to peek out, she saw 3 men using the fallen tree as cover, exchanging fire with Marshal Franks, who had taken position behind the coach. 3 men by the tree, she reported. "I don't see the driver." "He's down," Adam said grimly, squeezing off another shot. Jim's holding them off, but we're outnumbered. A bullet splintered the wood beside Adam's head, forcing him to duck. When he raised up again, his expression had hardened into determination. We need to get everyone out of this coach, he decided. It's too easy a target. Florence, help the others out the far door, away from the gunfire. Head for those rocks. He nodded toward a rocky outcropping about 50 yards from the road. What about you? Florence asked, already moving to help Mrs. Peterson. I'll cover you, then follow, he promised. Florence organized the terrified passengers, guiding Mrs. Peterson toward the door while the businessman and the couple huddled close behind. When I say go, run for those rocks, she instructed, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Stay low and don't stop for anything. Adam positioned himself at the window again. Ready, at Florence's nod, he called out, Jim, covering fire for passengers, on my mark. Marshal Franks's acknowledgement came in the form of rapid gunfire that momentarily silenced the attackers. Now, Adam shouted, and Florence pushed open the door, helping Mrs. Peterson to the ground. Go, go. She urged, practically dragging the elderly woman toward the rocks as the others scrambled after them. They had covered half the distance when Florence heard a cry behind her. Looking back, she saw the young wife had fallen, her husband trying desperately to help her up. Without hesitation, Florence ran back to them. Get to the rocks, she told the husband, looping the woman's arm over her shoulders. I'll help her. Together they half-dragged, half-carried the injured woman toward safety, bullets kicking up dust at their heels. By the time they reached the rocks, Florence was gasping for breath, her arms burning from supporting the woman's weight. Is everyone here? She panted, doing a quick count. The businessman, Mrs. Peterson, the couple. Where's Adam? A fresh burst of gunfire drew her attention back to the coach. Adam and Marshal Franks were now both using the vehicle for cover, returning fire at the attackers who had begun to advance from their position at the tree. He's still there, the businessman whimpered. We're going to die out here. No, we're not, Florence stated firmly. She reached for the small revolver hidden in her skirts, the one Adam had insisted she carry. Stay here. Keep low. Before anyone could stop her, Florence began working her way back toward the coach, using the sparse vegetation and uneven ground for cover. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her hands remained steady on the gun. She had nearly reached the coach when she saw one of the attackers circling around to flank Marshal Franks. From her position, she had a clear shot that neither Adam nor the marshal could take. Florence raised the revolver, remembering Adam's instructions. Breathe steady, squeeze, don't pull, she fired. The man dropped. The shot alerted Adam to her presence. His head whipped around, eyes widening when he spotted her. Florence, get back. Instead, she scrambled to join them behind the coach, dropping down beside Adam just as another volley of bullets splintered the wood above their heads. What the hell are you doing? He demanded, though there was more fear than anger in his voice. Helping, she replied simply. There are two more. Marshal Franks gave her a quick, approving nod. Good shot back there, but Adam's right, you shouldn't be here. Neither should any of us, Florence pointed out, but here we are. A bullet ricocheted off the metal step inches from her feet, ending the argument. Adam shifted position, putting himself more firmly between Florence and the direction of fire. They're trying to flank us again, Franks observed, his voice tight. We need to end this now. Adam nodded grimly. I'll draw their fire. You circle around, come at them from the side. Too risky, Franks countered. We need a distraction. Florence looked at the frightened horses, still hitched to the coach but panicking at the gunfire. An idea formed. The horses, she said. If we unhitch them, the noise and movement might give you the opening you need. Both men stared at her for a moment before Adam's face broke into a fierce grin. That's brilliant. To Franks, he added, can you reach the traces from your side? The marshal nodded. On your signal. Adam turned to Florence, his expression softening despite the danger surrounding them. Stay down. No matter what happens, stay down. She nodded, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. Be careful. For a breathless moment, his eyes held hers, communicating everything they hadn't said to each other. Then he was moving, crawling toward the front of the coach to reach the harnesses. Now, Adam called, and both men began frantically unfastening the traces that connected the horses to the coach. As soon as the team felt the restraints loosening, they surged forward, panicked by the gunfire and eager to escape. The sudden movement and thundering hooves created exactly the distraction they'd hoped for. Adam and Marshal Franks seized the moment, rising from cover to fire at the remaining attackers. One fell immediately. The other managed to get off a shot that went wild before Marshal Franks's bullet found its mark. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the gunfire had been. Florence remained frozen in place until Adam's hand appeared before her, helping her to her feet. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her legs felt wobbly with relief. "The others?" "I'll check on them," Marshal Franks volunteered, already moving toward the rocks where the other passengers had taken shelter. Adam holstered his gun and turned to face Florence fully, his expression a mixture of relief and residual fear. "That was reckless," he told her, though there was no real rebuke in his tone. "So was staying behind to cover our escape," she countered. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Seems we're both guilty of recklessness, then." "It appears so," Florence agreed, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing, of the intensity in his eyes as they looked at each other. The moment was broken by Marshal Franks returning with the other passengers. "Everyone's shaken but unharmed," he reported. "Except Mrs. Wilson, who twisted her ankle in the fall." Adam nodded, reluctantly stepping back from Florence. "What about the driver?" Franks's expression turned grim. "He didn't make it, shot through the heart in the first volley." Florence closed her eyes briefly, a pang of sorrow for the man whose name she hadn't even known. "Who were they?" she asked, looking toward the bodies of their attackers. "Wade's men," Franks confirmed after checking the bodies. "Not Jenkins, but I recognized two of them from wanted posters." "Hired guns. How did they know we'd be on this stage?" Adam wondered, his brow furrowed. Marshal Franks shook his head. "Could be they didn't. Might have been after the gold shipment and got more than they bargained for." He gestured to the strongbox still secured to the coach. "Or someone in Petaluma talked. Either way, the message was clear. They weren't safe yet." "What now?" Florence asked, looking at the disabled coach and the bodies scattered across the road. "We're only about 8 miles from the next station," Franks said after a moment's consideration. "I'll round up the horses if I can. If not, we walk." "And the gold?" Adam asked. "Stays with me," Franks said firmly. "I'll bury it if necessary and come back with a proper escort." It took nearly an hour to gather the scattered horses. 2 had run off too far to retrieve, but they managed to catch 4 enough to hitch to the coach once Adam and Franks had removed the fallen tree from the road. With the young husband acting as driver, they proceeded cautiously toward the next station. Florence sat beside Adam now, all pretense of being strangers abandoned in the wake of the attack. "You saved Marshal Franks's life," Adam said quietly as the coach rumbled forward. "That shot you took." Florence looked down at her hands, still amazed at her own actions. "I just reacted." There wasn't time to think. Adam's fingers covered hers briefly. "That's bravery, acting even when you're afraid." She looked up at him, finding his expression open and unguarded for perhaps the first time since they'd met. "I had a good teacher," she replied softly. His smile then genuine, warm, and meant only for her made Florence's heart skip a beat. Despite the danger they'd faced, despite the uncertainty ahead, she knew with sudden clarity that she was exactly where she was meant to be, beside this man who had become far more than just her protector. The journey to Carson City resumed the next day, with armed escorts accompanying the replacement stage. Florence and Adam maintained a public distance from each other, but their shared experience had forged a connection that needed no public acknowledgement. Marshal Franks had arranged for Florence to stay at a small boarding house run by a widow he trusted, while Adam took a room at a nearby hotel. The plan was for Florence to give her testimony to a circuit judge who would arrive in 3 days' time. On their second evening in Carson City, Adam escorted Florence on a walk through the town's small park, ostensibly to give her a change of scenery, but in reality to discuss matters they couldn't speak of at the boarding house. "Jim says the telegrams have gone out for Jenkins and the others," Adam informed her as they strolled along a tree-lined path. Federal warrants now, which means Wade can't use his influence to quash them. Florence nodded, relief washing through her. And after I testify, what then? Adam was quiet for a moment, clearly choosing his words with care. That depends on what you want, Florence. She stopped walking, turning to face him directly. What do you mean? Adam's gaze was steady on hers. You could return to Boston or continue to your aunt in Sacramento. Once the danger has passed, you'll be free to go wherever you choose. The thought of returning to her former life, to endless social calls and embroidery, and the prospect of marriage to someone like Henry Caldwell suddenly seemed unbearable. But the alternative? And if I choose to stay? She asked softly. In the West, I mean. Something flickered in Adam's eyes, hope, perhaps, or something deeper. Then you'd need to find a place for yourself, a purpose. I've been thinking about that, Florence admitted. Carson City has a school in need of teachers. The marshal's wife mentioned it yesterday. Adam's eyebrows raised slightly. A teacher. Is that something you'd want? Florence nodded, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. I was educated at the finest girls' seminary in Boston. I speak 3 languages and can play the pianoforte tolerably well. Surely I can teach children their letters and numbers. A smile spread slowly across Adam's face. I have no doubt you'd be exceptional at it. They resumed walking, the silence between them comfortable yet charged with unspoken possibilities. And what about you? Florence finally asked. Will you return to your homestead? Adam's gaze drifted to the distant mountains. I built that place thinking it was what I wanted: solitude, independence. But these past days... He looked at her then, his eyes holding hers. These past days have reminded me that a man needs more than just land and a roof over his head. Florence's heart quickened at his words and the intent behind them. What are you saying, Adam? He stopped again, turning to face her fully. With careful deliberation, he took her hands in his. I'm saying that meeting you has changed everything for me, Florence. I'm saying that the thought of returning to that cabin alone feels... He paused, searching for the right word. Empty. Florence's breath caught in her throat. Adam, I'm not asking for promises, he hastened to add. It's too soon for that, and you have decisions to make that shouldn't be influenced by feelings that might be born more of danger shared than true affinity. Florence couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her. For a man of few words, you certainly found many just now. Adam smiled ruefully. I'm trying to be honorable. I know, she said softly. It's one of the things I admire most about you. Their eyes held, and Florence saw in his gaze all the things he wasn't yet ready to say aloud and all the things she wasn't yet ready to hear. Perhaps, she suggested, we could both stay in Carson City for a time, see what possibilities might develop. Adam's fingers tightened gently around hers. I'd like that very much. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. They separated discreetly as a couple with a young child passed by on the path. I should get you back to the boarding house, Adam said, offering his arm. Mrs. Wilson keeps strict hours. As they walked back through the gathering twilight, Florence found herself thinking of how much her life had changed in just over a week. She had witnessed a murder, fled for her life, been sheltered by a stranger who had become so much more, faced down armed killers, and now stood on the cusp of a new beginning far from everything she had ever known. Yet despite all the danger and uncertainty, she couldn't bring herself to wish any of it undone. For it had led her here, to this moment, walking arm in arm with a man unlike any she had ever known, a man who had shielded her with his body when bullets flew, and with his honor when the danger passed. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Florence was just finishing breakfast when Mrs. Wilson, the boarding house owner, announced a visitor. There's a gentleman to see you, Miss Vallens, the older woman said with a meaningful arch of her eyebrows. Not your usual caller either. Expecting Marshal Franks with news about the upcoming testimony, Florence was surprised to find a distinguished-looking gentleman in an expensive suit waiting in the parlor. He rose when she entered, revealing himself to be in his 50s, with silver threading through his dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. Miss Vallens, he greeted her with a small bow. I am Judge William Harding. I understand you have information regarding the murder of Robert Langley. Florence's surprise must have shown on her face, for he added, the circuit judge was delayed. I happened to be in Carson City on other business when Marshal Franks's request reached the governor's office. They asked me to hear your testimony. Of course, Florence replied, gathering her composure. I'm prepared to tell you everything I saw. Judge Harding gestured for her to sit. Before we begin formally, there's something you should know. He glanced toward the parlor door, ensuring they weren't overheard. Robert Langley was my friend. We attended law school together in Boston. Florence's eyes widened at this revelation. Then you know he wasn't the criminal they've painted him to be. Indeed, the judge confirmed. Robert wrote to me about his suspicions regarding Harlan Wade's land acquisitions. He believed Wade was using forged documents to claim ownership of land rich in silver deposits. That's what they were arguing about, Florence said eagerly. The men who killed him mentioned documents and forgeries. Judge Harding leaned forward. Did you see these documents, Miss Vallens? Florence shook her head regretfully. No, I only heard them demanding papers from Mr. Langley. He refused, and that's when. She swallowed hard. That's when they shot him. The judge's expression grew grim. Without those documents, proving Wade's crimes will be difficult, even with your testimony about the murder itself. A thought occurred to Florence. Judge Harding, did Mr. Langley know the men were coming for him that night? The judge considered this. He was cautious by nature. Why do you ask? Because he might have hidden the documents, Florence reasoned. If he suspected he was in danger, he wouldn't have kept such important evidence on his person or in his luggage where it could be easily found. Judge Harding's eyes lit with interest. An excellent point, Miss Vallens, but where would he have hidden them? Florence thought back to that terrible night, trying to recall every detail. There was a Bible on the bedside table in his room. I remember noticing it She blushed slightly. When I looked through the keyhole. Robert was a religious man, Judge Harding mused, always carried his mother's Bible. Could he have hidden something inside it? Florence suggested. The hotel staff would be unlikely to disturb a Bible, and his killers might not have thought to look there. The judge stood abruptly. I believe it's worth investigating. If the Bible is still at the hotel in Silver Creek. It might be dangerous to send someone there, Florence cautioned. Wade's men control the town. Judge Harding smiled, a hint of steel in his expression. That's why I'll go myself. Few would dare interfere with a federal judge, even in a town like Silver Creek. Before Florence could respond, the parlor door opened to admit Adam and Marshal Franks. Both men looked surprised to see the judge. After introductions were made, Florence quickly explained their theory about the hidden documents. Adam's expression darkened at the mention of returning to Silver Creek. With all due respect, Judge Harding, that's Wade's territory, he said. Your position may not protect you there. I won't be going alone, the judge replied calmly. Marshal Franks can accompany me in an official capacity. Franks nodded his agreement. We could leave this afternoon, be in Silver Creek by tomorrow evening. What about Florence? Adam asked, concern evident in his voice. She's still in danger until those men are apprehended. I'll arrange for a deputy to remain here, Franks assured him. And I assume you'll be keeping a close eye on Miss Vallens as well. Adam's gaze met Florence's. Always, he said quietly. The next 2 days passed with excruciating slowness. Florence found herself jumping at every sound, imagining Jenkins and his men around every corner despite Adam's constant, reassuring presence. They received one brief telegram from Marshal Franks confirming their safe arrival in Silver Creek, but no further news. On the morning of the third day, Florence was helping Mrs. Wilson in the kitchen when they heard the sound of horses approaching at speed. Adam, who had been reading in the parlor, was instantly alert, moving to the window with his hand on his gun. It's Franks, he reported with relief. And Judge Harding with him. Florence rushed to the door as the two men dismounted. The judge was carrying a leather satchel, his expression triumphant despite the obvious exhaustion of hard riding. We found them, he announced without preamble as they entered the house. The documents were exactly where you suggested, tucked into the binding of Langley's Bible. Marshal Franks grinned broadly. Judge Harding's credentials got us into the hotel without raising suspicion. The room had been cleaned, but the Bible was still there, left behind as unimportant. And the documents? Adam asked. Everything we need, Judge Harding confirmed, patting the satchel. Forged deeds, falsified mining claims, even records of bribes paid to local officials. Robert had built a comprehensive case. What happens now? Florence asked, scarcely able to believe their luck. I've already sent telegrams to the governor and to federal marshals in Virginia City, Judge Harding explained. By now, they should be arresting Wade and issuing warrants for Jenkins and the others. It's over. Florence whispered, the possibility almost too wonderful to believe. Marshal Franks nodded. Nearly. We'll still need your testimony to convict Langley's killers when they're caught, but Wade's empire is crumbling as we speak. Adam's hand found Florence's, his fingers intertwining with hers. You're safe now, he said softly. Truly safe. The reality of it washed over her in a wave of emotion so powerful that tears sprang to her eyes. After days of fear and flight, of looking over her shoulder and sleeping with one eye open, the nightmare was ending. Judge Harding cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to him. Miss Vallens, your courage and quick thinking have helped bring a dangerous criminal to justice. Robert would have been proud to know his work was completed, thanks to you. Florence blushed at the praise. I only did what anyone would have done. No, Adam said firmly, his eyes never leaving her face. You did what only you would have done, what only you could have done. The days that followed brought rapid developments. Harlan Wade was arrested, and his network of corruption began to unravel as associates hastened to save themselves by providing evidence against him. Jenkins and one of his companions were apprehended trying to flee across the border into California. Florence gave her formal testimony before Judge Harding, an experience that was both cathartic and draining. Afterward, she found Adam waiting for her outside the courthouse, his steady presence a comfort she had come to rely on. It's done, she told him as they walked slowly toward the boarding house. Judge Harding says my part in this is complete. I'm free to decide what comes next. Adam was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. And have you decided? Florence stopped walking, turning to face him. I've written to the school board accepting the teaching position they offered. I start in 2 weeks when the new term begins. A slow smile spread across Adam's face. So you're staying in Carson City? I am, she confirmed. If recent events have taught me anything, it's that life is too precious to spend conforming to others' expectations. I want to build something of my own, something meaningful. Adam nodded, understanding in his eyes. Teaching suits you. You have a natural way of seeing to the heart of things, of helping others see it too. They resumed walking, comfortable silence stretching between them, until they reached the small park where they had spoken of possibilities just days earlier. I've made a decision as well, Adam said as they followed the familiar path. I'm selling my homestead. Florence looked at him in surprise. But you worked so hard to build it. I did, he acknowledged, and I don't regret a moment of that work, but a man's needs change. What satisfied me before doesn't anymore. And what would satisfy you now? Florence asked softly, her heart beating faster. Adam stopped beneath a towering pine tree, taking both her hands in his. A life shared, he said simply, a purpose beyond myself. A chance to build something new with someone who sees the world as clearly as you do. Florence felt tears pricking her eyes. Adam, I know it's soon, he continued, his voice low and earnest. Too soon for promises or forever, but I'm asking for a beginning, Florence. A chance to court you properly, to discover if what we feel for each other might grow into something lasting. Florence looked up at this remarkable man who had risked everything to protect her, who had seen her at her most afraid and her most courageous, who had never once treated her as anything less than his equal. I think, she said carefully, that some things don't need as much time as others. Some things you just know. Adam's eyes brightened with hope. And what do you know, Florence Vallens? In answer, she raised herself on tiptoe and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief but perfect, a promise, a beginning, a declaration. When she drew back, Adam's expression was one of wonder and joy. I'll take that as a yes, he murmured. Florence laughed, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. A definite yes, Mr. Donovan. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. I should warn you, he said, his voice taking on a teasing quality she had rarely heard from him, that I intend to be very thorough in my courtship. I would expect nothing less, Florence replied with mock seriousness. You've already fulfilled the rescue damsel in distress requirement quite impressively. Adam laughed, the sound rich and free. I believe traditional courtship also involves meeting the family. Your aunt in Sacramento might wonder what became of you, Florence groaned. Aunt Harriet. I completely forgot about her in all the chaos. She must be frantic. Perhaps, Adam suggested, we should pay her a visit, once things are settled here. Florence repeated, liking the sound of it. Adam nodded, his expression growing serious again. I go where you go now, Florence. That's the oath I made when I first sheltered you with my body in that barn. I just didn't know then that I was making it for always. Florence felt the truth of his words resonating in her own heart. From that first moment when he had covered her with his body to protect her from harm, their fates had been intertwined not by chance or circumstance, but by something deeper, something that had recognized in each other a kindred spirit, a perfect match. For always, she echoed softly, sealing the words with another kiss as the Nevada sun bathed them in golden light, illuminating the beginning of a journey they would travel together. 3 years later, Florence stood on the porch of their home on the outskirts of Carson City, watching as Adam taught their 1-year-old son to take his first tentative steps across the yard. The little boy named Robert, after the man whose death had inadvertently brought them together, squealed with delight as he wobbled toward his father's outstretched arms. That's it, Bobby, Adam encouraged, his face alight with pride. Come to Pa. The child managed 3 steps before plopping down on his well-padded bottom, his expression of surprise drawing laughter from both parents. Florence descended the steps to join her family, one hand resting lightly on her growing belly where their second child stirred. After the chaos that had marked their first meeting, the piece of their life together felt like a precious gift, one they never took for granted. Adam had built them a comfortable home with his own hands, larger and more welcoming than his solitary cabin had been. Florence continued to teach at the local school, having discovered a genuine passion for education that her Boston upbringing had never allowed her to explore. Together, they had created something neither had possessed before, a family bound by choice rather than obligation, by love rather than convention. As Adam scooped up their son and came to meet her, Florence reflected on the strange twists of fate that had led her here. The horror of witnessing a murder had somehow led to the greatest joy she had ever known. What are you thinking about? Adam asked, noting her thoughtful expression as he slipped his free arm around her waist. Florence smiled up at the man who had first been her protector, then her friend, and finally her husband. I was thinking about how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best. Adam nodded, understanding immediately. From that barn in the middle of nowhere to here, he mused. Quite a journey. One I wouldn't change, Florence said firmly, not a single step of it. Adam's eyes, still that same clear blue that had first met hers in the shadowy barn, softened with emotion. Nor would I. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Not a single step. As they stood together, their son babbling happily between them and their future growing within her, Florence knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in Boston's elegant drawing rooms, or even in the schoolhouse where she now taught, but in the circle of this man's arms, in the family they had created, in the love that had begun when a frightened woman fleeing for her life had found shelter with a solitary cowboy who had shielded her with his body and his oath. An oath that, like all the promises Adam Donovan made, he had kept faithfully for always.